Thank you, Joseph. Welcome, everyone. Today we are going to be doing an intro to environment design in Unity. So a quick set of introductions. As Joseph mentioned, my name is Andy. I'll be joined today by Tim. I'm the Director of Technology at KairosXR, where we specialize in building training and educational applications. Tim, go ahead and pass it over to you for an introduction.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Andy, for the opening there. Tim here, calling you from Minnesota. I'm a Unity developer and instructional designer. As Andy mentioned, Director of Design at KairosXR, building occupational training solutions as well.
Awesome. So today we have a few goals. The goal is going to be to create a real-time environment using the Unity 3D software. We're going to learn some tips and tricks to creating realistic-looking scenes in Unity. And then we are going to outline your next steps in Unity. So in order to do so, we have a few agenda items. So just to give you an idea of the order of operations today, we've done a brief round of introductions. Most of today's session is going to be spent in Unity. So I'm going to share my screen, I'm going to jump into Unity, we're going to work through it. We're going to do a quick intro to the editor. We're going to do a project setup, letting you know where you can get the assets, where you can follow along. We'll talk about placing a model in your scene. We'll talk about creating a terrain, as well as the trees and the grass and things that make it look nice and realistic. And then we'll use the asset store to add some additional assets and take the scenes to the next level. And then at the end, we will touch on the lighting workflow. We will have a QA following that, but I would encourage anyone who's following along live to ask questions as we're moving. There are a few of us here, so we should be able to address all of your questions. So just do not hold back. Let those come as they come to mind. So go ahead and drop those in. And then at the end, we have a few next steps. So if you are looking to expand your Unity knowledge and take it to the next level, I've outlined a few steps you can take to continue learning beyond this workshop. So we're going to start with a few example videos of what is possible in Unity. For those of you who don't know, Unity is a real-time 3D engine. This means that you can visualize your 3D models in real time, which means you can make lighting changes, you can make model changes, you can adjust materials, assets. You can do all that stuff in real time. So as you can see here in a few of these example videos, you can see some of the work that is possible in Unity. So over here we have the Unity London office, which is a demo of their interior space, showing some of the high fidelity capabilities in Unity. And then we have an example of some engineering as well as some architectural pre-visualization going on in the middle. And then this last video is talking about bringing the BIM models into Unity. So this should act as a bit of a primer for what is possible in Unity. Again, happy to answer any questions and follow up if you'd like to dive deeper or you have specifics, feel free to reach out. So with that, I do want to open it up right away if there are any questions. Again, this is just a reminder that if you do have questions, continue to drop them in and we will be able to get those answered as we go. So anyone who is tuning in live, let's make this a back and forth session. I'd like to your engagement and answer all of your questions. If you are watching the recorded version, definitely feel free to reach out. We are on Slack and you can find our contact information at the end of the slide deck as well. So do not hold back the questions. We want to be a resource. That is our goal here today. So with that, I can check here. Don't see any questions right off the bat. So we will go ahead and dive in. So first thing we're going to do is do a quick rundown of the Unity editor. So folks who maybe not used the Unity editor before or maybe very novice with Unity editor, we do want to take a moment to touch on the different windows and some of the things you can use to get started with today's session. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over to Unity, and we will do an intro to the editor. So here I am in my Unity screen. You should see that shared now. So what are we looking at? Well, this is a project that I have created in Unity. I'm using Unity 2019.4, and I've just gone ahead and created a new basic project. So when you first open Unity, you will see something that looks like this. And we have 4 main windows. We'll do a quick rundown of each of them, and then we'll dive in because working is the best way to build familiarity. Right off the bat, we can see in the middle, we have what we call the scene view. Now, this is where we configure our 3D environment. Right? This is where we position assets, we position our lights, we can see a preview of our work, and we will see that as we build up our scene today. On the left side, we have the hierarchy, which is a simple list view of everything that is in the scene. Now, this is just an empty scene, so there's only a camera and a directional light. But again, as we build this out today, we will see additional assets being added to this hierarchy. Again, the hierarchy is just a list view of anything that is in our scene view. In the bottom panel, we have what we call the project window. This has all of our assets. So as we bring in models, we bring in different materials, images, audio, anything like that is going to show up in the project view. Now, this is essentially just a folder structure where we have all the assets that you'll use to build your project. And we'll talk about where we'll get some of these assets as we move forward. And then the last window over here on the right is the inspector. Now, the inspector allows us to inspect or view certain parameters and properties of our objects in our scene. So if we look at the main camera, for example, we can see the properties of that main camera. So that is a quick rundown. Again, if you are tuning in, would encourage you to ask questions. We'll do our best to address those. If you're watching this remotely or after it's recorded, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But again, the best way to learn this editor is by starting to work through it. So with that high-level primer, we are going to jump into the next challenge. So I'm going to jump back to the slides, give you a little preview of what we're working with here. So I'm going to talk about the project setup. Right? So that is our first step here. We're going to go through what I have as a complete scene. We'll look at it. We'll see some of the features. I'll call out what we're going to do today. This will help give you a good idea of what you can create today using the tips and tricks that we cover in this session. So with that said, I'm going to jump back into the Unity editor here. And I'm going to open up my completed scene, and I will share these assets or the completed scene. So if you want to kind of poke around in here and see what's done, I will share those assets so that you can access those and poke around. But just to give you an idea, what we have a scene here with an architectural asset. I just found this one on the asset store, and I'll show you where I got it. But the idea here is that we have this cabin model that's brought into the scene, and we've gone ahead and created an environment to go around it. So we have terrain, including some of these trees. We have, as you can see out here, some water. We have a nice little dock. We have some of the lighting. You can see the shadows. And we'll be able to go into play mode here. And we should be able to walk around, again, viewing everything that we've done with our model and with our scene. So that is a quick overview. Again, continue to drop those questions in as you have them. We will be building up to this scene today. So as you open up your Unity project and get started, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is go ahead and download an asset that we will be able to work with. So the asset that I'll be using today is going to be this cabin asset. This is something that I just found on the asset store. I'm not going to spend too much time going through the asset itself because we will learn how to bring in your own models, additional models through some of the other workshops in the AEC Hackathon this week. So again, this workshop is going to be focused on everything surrounding the asset itself. This is just going to be a placeholder. Again, there's some other workshops where you learn how to import your own BIM models and CAD models into Unity. So if you would like to get this specific asset, the best way to do it is going to be to go to the Asset Store, which you can find in this middle tab. And then you can just search for the furnished cabin. And mine's just going to refresh here. But you can just do a search for the assets here, look for the furnished cabin, and it will come up. You can go ahead and download that and import it into the project. And there it is. So that's where I got that asset, and I will continue to mention additional assets as I bring them in, but that is really the main one that you need to get started here. So with that, I'm going to check the chat. Looks like we are good to go. Again, as you have questions, continue to drop those in. I will sound like a broken record, but I do want to be a resource, and so do not hold back on those questions. Again, this is our scene today. So without further ado, we'll jump into the first little challenge here. So I'm going to jump back to the slides. We just discussed the project and what we are aiming to create today. And now we are going to talk about the first step. So we're going to take an empty scene and we're going to build it up to what you just saw. So the very first thing we need to do is place a model in the scene. So back in Unity, I'm just going to open up this starter scene here. It looks like that one already has some materials. So what I'm going to do, and what you can do, is you can go to your scenes folder here. You can right click, create a new scene. Okay. And we will call it the AEC Hackathon. And I can open this up by double clicking on it. And again, we are just in an empty scene. This is where you would start in Unity. So we want to build an environment, and we want to build this environment around just an asset. Again, the placeholder asset that I'm using, thanks for the questions here, the asset name is the furnished cabin. And I just chose this one because it's free and it's simple. Again, there's going to be a few other workshops this week where you learn how to bring your own assets, maybe BIM models or CAD models, into Unity, and you can use those as you move forward. For today's session, we'll just be using this furnished cabin asset, which you can find in the asset store by just searching for furnished cabin, and go ahead and download that. Again, that's just a free asset that we'll be using as a placeholder. So once you've downloaded that asset, you should see something in your assets folder here in the project window called furnished cabin. And in here, we can go to a folder called prefabs. And there is going to be one called the building full prefab. Now with this, I can just simply drag this into the scene. I'll just drop it. See that it has been placed in this. A simple pro tip here is when you have something placed in the scene and you want to focus your scene view on it, you can just double click on that object in the hierarchy, and that will bring it to the center of your view. So we can now move around the scene, and the way I'm moving around, if folks are new to Unity here, is you can hold down your right mouse button, and then you can use the WASD keys to move around in the scene. And this is a great way to kind of get different angles and see what's going on with your model in the scene. So we've placed this building right here, and I can select it here in the hierarchy. Again, if we remember that the inspector tells us the properties of this building. Now this building simply has a position in the scene, and we can see that we are set to 0, 0, 0, which is going to be the origin, and that's a great place to start. So we'll just leave it there. You can continue to explore the other items, objects that are underneath this building. So as you start to break this down, you can see each of the pieces. You can step through this and see what makes up this building. But again, for now, we are focused on the environment, so we'll just take the building as is. This is going to be a placeholder, and we will just leave it right there for now. So we've added the model, and now it is time to build an environment around the model. So I'm going to jump to the next challenge. Again, as you have questions, continue to drop them in. We'll do our best to answer those. So we have this model placed. The next thing we'll want to do is we want to build a terrain. And now the terrain will essentially provide some context for our model. If our model is just there in empty space, it could be a little strange. We're not going to be able to get a nice visualization. But with Unity, we have the ability to quickly create terrains that can provide some nice context for our model. So I'm going to jump back into Unity. We have our building in the scene, and now we would like to add a terrain. So to add a terrain, really quite simple. All we need to do is hit this plus button here, this drop down, and we can go to 3D object, go over, and there's an option to add the terrain. If I click that, let's see what happens. Okay. Unity thought about it for a second, and then now we have this nice terrain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift my view around, and we can see that this is a relatively large terrain. And that is what we want. We are going to be able to create a nice hills and valleys. We'll be able to add our water into this. We'll be able to move our building so that it lives on the terrain in a nice position. So what can we do with this terrain? Right now we just see this big flat plane. Right? And if I zoom out, again, I'm just using the right click and the WASD keys to move around. We can see our building there for reference of how big this terrain is. One of the really neat things about the terrain is it's more than just a plane. Right? With this terrain, we can actually sculpt this. Right? We can sculpt this to create whatever we'd like. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to make sure that I have my terrain selected here in the hierarchy. And when I have the terrain selected, I'm going to be able to use the inspector to see properties about my terrain. Again, so I could move the position of my terrain. I could rotate it. I could scale it up and down. But what's really interesting is this terrain component right here. So this is a tool that will allow us to modify our terrain. So what can we do with the terrain tool? Well, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click this Paint Terrain button here, and this will bring up a few options. What we can do is we have loads of different options on how we can sculpt and do different effects, such as thermal and wind erosion. We can raise and lower terrain, we can add holes, and we'll see some of these different effects. But for starters, let's go ahead and go to the raise or lower terrain. Now coming down, we have some different brushes that we can choose. So I'm just going to choose this big round brush so we can see what's happening. And when I have this selected, what I can now do is when I drag this into the scene, we can see that it's giving me a preview of what's going to happen when I click my mouse. And so what I can do is I can click my mouse and I can start to shape this terrain. And if I hold it down, I'm going to get larger effects. Again, I can move around using my WASD and right mouse click to get the view that I want. And I can go through here and I can start to literally raise and modify my terrain. I can explore some of these different brushes. So as you can see, this big circular brush is going to create something that doesn't look very natural. But if I go into some of these other effects, I can start to create stuff that looks a little bit more organic. Okay. So there are a few different brushes that you can use. Check these out, explore these. Again, using the organic brushes is going to give you a more realistic looking terrain. Okay, so we can start to click and raise the terrain that way. The other thing we can do is if you hold shift, that will lower terrain. And then in the terrain window here, you see you have lots of parameters that you can adjust. Right? So we can adjust the strength of the brush, we can adjust the brush size, the rotation, spacing. Right? So this is going to allow you to further customize your brush and therefore your terrain. So for example, I could increase the strength so that one little click will pull it up quite a bit. I could adjust the size. So maybe I just want to affect little areas like this. I can do it that way. So that is a quick overview of what is possible here with modifying the terrains. Again, there are a few other options that you can check out. You can add noise, you can add terraces, right? So if you want to terrace this, you can start to do that, see what that looks like. Again, encourage you to explore some of these different options. Again, check out the erosion, stamping some meshes, things like that. But they're going to be similar to what we just did there. We'll leave those for you to explore. So that is a quick overview of how you start to modify your terrains. What I want to do now is share some of the tips that I've taken away from modifying terrains before, and especially for creating an environment for our little cabin, which you can see way down here in the corner. So what I would like to do is I would like to have my cabin next to a little lake, and I would like a little flat area for the cabin to live on, and then we'll add some hills and mountains behind the cabin. So one of the really neat things you can do with terrain is you can actually set a height. Now this is really helpful for creating foundations, and you'll see what I mean here. So what I can do is I can set the height. I can come down to the set height controls, and I can choose the height that I want to set. And so for example, let's just set a height of say 5. I'm going to select this big brush again, and as I come in and click on my scene here, you can see what this does, right? This sets wherever my brush is to a designated height. Again, this is great for creating foundations and areas that are flat so that we can add our model and work from there. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see what's going on here. We can see that wherever I put my brush, it is setting the height to a height of 5, which I set right here in the height controls. Okay. So I've modified this environment a little bit. What I would like to do now is I would like to create a corner of this environment, a terrain, so that we can have our lake, and then we are going to create a little raised area for our cabin. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to set the height back to 0 and create an area where I can add my water. So let's go ahead and do that. I can increase my brush size to make this go faster. I'm just going to hit this whole corner over here. That looks good. And then let's find a little spot for the cabin. I'm thinking somewhere right around there. I'm going to set the height to 5. I'm going to bring my brush size down a little bit. And we're going to create a nice little area for our cabin. Okay. And I could, continue to customize this. And as you explore, I would encourage you to check out the rest of the tools and what you can accomplish with just modifying the terrain. So I've created an area over here that is flat. This is just going to be a height of 0. We are going to fill this in with water, which I'll show you how to do later on. And then I've created a little area here that is raised, and this will be a place to hold our cabin. So now I'm going to go ahead and select my cabin. that I've added to the scene here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see cabin. And I can press the W key, or I can click this move tool right here. The W is the hotkey to do this, and this brings up the transform axes, and I can just select this and drag this over. Again, I'm going to move it over to our little area that we've designated for it. So I can drag it by each axis, or I can drag it in a plane using that square. So I'm going to drag that over like this. Again, a quick way to zoom into this is to double click it. So there we are. I can see it here. Remember that we raised the terrain here, so we need to raise our building up. And if we bring it up to 5, which is the height that we set for the terrain there, then our building will be right on the ground. Okay, so we've created this big area. What I would like to do is bring our cabin over, so it's going to have a nice, it's going to be close to the water. And what I can do is I can use the rotate tool, and I can rotate this around so that the front door is looking out onto the water. Okay. So what have we done so far? We've created a terrain. We've stamped out a region that we can add our cabin to here. We've brought the cabin over, and now we are ready to take this terrain to the next step. So as you have questions, again, continue to drop those in, and we will get those answered. But while you are bringing those questions in and working on your scenes, we're going to jump into the next challenge. So we've sculpted a terrain. Make sure my screen updates here. So we have sculpted the terrain, and now we would like to add some textures. Right, so right now it's just a default texture on the terrain, but what is going to be really great and take this to the next level is when we start to add some rock, we start to add some sand, we can even add things like snow. We can paint those onto the terrain. That's going to start to make it look realistic. So how do we add textures to our terrain? Let's go ahead and jump back into Unity and check that out now. So again, to access the terrain tools, I need to make sure that I have my terrain selected in the hierarchy. So once I have it selected, I'll be able to see my terrain component over here. I'm going to zoom out again, just so we can get a good view of what's going on. And if you remember, what we just did is we painted the terrain. And we painted specifically the terrain height using the raise and lower tool as well as the set height tool. Now we want to paint the terrain with textures. So in order to do that, I can select paint texture here. What I'm going to want to do is come down. We're going to have a new option here for material. I can open that up and see that we're using the default terrain standard. And then in that material, I have an option for layers. Okay. So we're going to be able to add different layers. Again, this is going to be our rock, our dirt, our sand, our snow. So in order to add the layers, you can just click Add Layer. There'll be a few default terrain options that you'll have, and I'll make sure that you guys have them set up in your project here in just a second. But I can just select, say, let's start with rock. And once I've added that, you can see that the whole area has now been painted with rock, and that is just the default. Once you set the first one, the whole terrain will adopt that first layer. We can add additional layers. So I'm going to add some dirt, add moss, sand. I'm just going to add each of these in. And so you may be wondering where these objects come from, and the best place to get these is through the asset store. There is a terrain samples that you can go ahead and access. So if you just do a search for terrain, believe it should come up right here. It is the Terrain Tools sample asset. This is, again, another free pack. This is from Unity, and this has some of those default layers that you can use. And I'll drop a link to all of these so that you'll have a reference for that as well. But again, these layers come from this selection here in the asset store. So with the scene view here and my layers added, I can start to paint my scene. So you can see rock has been applied everywhere. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take dirt, for example, and I can start to come in here and paint my area here with dirt. I'm going to leave the mountains with that rock. I can go ahead and add, say, some sand. Right here, you know that this is going to be covered by water, so maybe the edge here is all sandy. Maybe the deeper parts of the water over here are going to have some moss. And you start to get the idea. I can come in and just start to paint textures how I like them. I can, again, still increase my brush size. Okay. And I could add something like snow to the very top. Again, continue to explore and modify your terrain as you like, but for this purpose, I will just hit this with a little snow, bring the size down a little bit. Okay. And so we can start to see that effect. And if I was building this whole scene out, I would come through here and start to make this whole area look less uniform as well. But for now, I have a thing that I think looks like a pretty good start. So we can see down here that we have our rocky mountain with some snow. Maybe I could clean that up a little bit, but that's fine for now. I've added some dirt, we have some sand, and we have some moss for our water. So if there are any questions, continue to drop those in. Happy to answer those questions as we're moving here. We are covering some good ground. And as you're working through this project on your own, continue to explore some of these different options. Continue to paint your entire texture, your entire terrain, and make it look the way you want it to look. But with this base texture down, we are ready to move on to the next step. So again, we've added the custom textures to our terrain. And now we want to add some foliage. Right? And this will really start to bring the terrain together and actually make it look like something that you would see in the real world. So we have a question here about the complexity of the layers affecting the performance. So the general idea is that as you add more layers, that is adding more materials to the terrain. And as you add more materials, you're going to need to do additional draw calls, which means that the GPU is going to need to render another layer. You can get away with quite a few layers in the terrain. So using a dozen or 24 layers is not going to affect performance too much. With that said, it's all going to be relative to your target device. So to boil that down, use a few layers. It's going to have a little bit of an effect on performance. There's always some level of trade-off, but the layers are not going to be as impactful to performance as, say, adding a bunch of high-quality trees or really high-quality water. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. All right. So going to jump into Unity here, and we are going to create the trees. Okay. So back in Unity here, and before I jump into this, there's one additional package. And again, I'll create a list of all these links, and I'll share this example project as well, so you'll have that for reference. But the additional package that will have some of these trees that are really great to use with this terrain is called the standard assets. And so again, you can just do a search for this in the Unity Asset Store. And you can download this one here. Standard assets for Unity. This has got a lot of great tools. Okay. So that is another package that I will be using today, the standard assets. You can download that right from the Unity Asset Store. So I'm going to jump back to the scene. We have our terrain. The next step is creating trees. So how could we add foliage to this, and how could we start to make this scene look a little bit less bare? So again, this is going to be a terrain tool feature. So if I select the terrain here, I can go ahead and again, I'm just going to move around in my scene here, get a better view of this whole little area, like something like that. And now what I want to do is, with my terrain selected, I want to go to this option here that it says Paint Trees. Okay. And if I select the Paint Trees option, I'll have an opportunity to add trees to this Paint Trees tool, and then I'll be able to paint them into the scene. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like now. Go ahead and click Edit Tree, Add Tree. So this is how I add a new tree. It will ask for a tree prefab. Okay, anytime you see prefab, that just means a pre-configured object. I can click this little circle with a dot, and I can search through my scene and select an asset that I would like to use. And so there's one in here called a conifer. Again, this is from the standard assets that downloaded from the asset store. So I'm just going to select this one. And I can go ahead and click Add. And now you can see that I have that tree here. That tree, again, is just an asset that I found through the asset store in that standard assets. So I can search for that here and see that that just corresponds to a game object, if I spell it right, here in the project. Okay. You can see it's under the standard assets environment speed tree. So let's go check that out because there are a few other options. Environment speed tree. So I've got a broadleaf tree as well. So why don't we go ahead and add. So I can see here this one's called a broadleaf tree. These trees are speed tree assets, and I'll drop a link to that speed tree. But a speed tree is another application you can use to create realistic trees. They plug nicely into Unity because they allow the wind to affect them right off the bat. So we'll see that in a second, but I'm going to go to terrain and I'm going to add one more tree. So I can hit add tree, do the circle with the dot to select, and I'm going to search for the broadleaf. There's a desktop and a mobile version. I'm on a desktop here. I'm not targeting mobile with this demo, so I'm going to just select the desktop version. Click Add, and now I've got two trees here that I can choose from. So with this tree selected, what I can now do is use my brush to paint trees into the scene. So as I click, you'll be able to see that trees are now being added to the scene. And we can see that there's going to be a couple problems with that. One, that's really dense right off the bat, and they all look extremely uniform, so that doesn't look great. So I'm going to do Control-Z to undo that. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change my brush size. I'm going to reduce my tree density, so I can adjust the settings of this tree placement. And I can set the tree height between two random values. So I just extend this all the way. So it means trees, there'll be a random value between the low value and the high value here. And then when I go ahead and paint, I get something that looks a little bit better. Okay. So again, that, Depending on the environment, the biome that you're trying to recreate, that could be a proper density. You can go through here and just continue to paint these trees. And I can select the other type of trees to add some variety here. Okay. And now, I'm going to zoom in here, and we can start to see that this is looking much better than it was before, right? This doesn't look like just a desolate terrain anymore. It starts to look somewhat realistic with these trees in the background. So you can come in, you can further customize these trees, place them in specific areas, add them throughout the scene. One note here, speaking to performance, because we did have a question about performance earlier. If you add, hundreds of trees, you're going to want to make sure that you are targeting, a higher end device. This is going to be dependent on the type of tree that you're adding. Notice that when we added this broadleaf, there was an option for a mobile version and a desktop version. If you're targeting an immersive headset, so an AR headset or a VR headset or a mobile phone, you're going to want to use that mobile version of the asset. That's just going to be optimized for that hardware. If you are on a desktop computer with a designated GPU, you can get away with using these desktop quality assets and using quite a few of them. But do note that if you add, a bunch of trees, thousands of trees, you may see a performance hit. So you'll want to find that balance. Again, continuing to go into play mode and check this out as you are going through the experience, or as you're going through the development. So we have trees added. The other thing that we can do is we can actually add grass. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. That falls under our foliage category. So what I can do is I can click Paint Details on the terrain tool. Okay. And I can come down to the brush details here. I can click Edit Details, and I have the opportunity to add a grass texture. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. This brings up this grass texture window, which again is going to call for a texture. I can open this up and I can just search for grass. Again, in that standard assets, there are a couple options that you can use. The grass frond 01 albedo alpha is a fine option. I'm going to select that. You see it's been populated. I can adjust the height, the spread of color between the healthy color and the dry color. And then I'm just going to leave it as is for now, but you could further customize those to your liking. Hit Add. What this does is it allows me to paint grass, similar to how I painted those trees. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to choose a brush. I'm going to bring the brush size down, and I'm going to bring the strength down and the opacity down as well. And then I'll bring the size back up just a little bit, and we'll start to paint that grass in. Okay. Notice that the grass will be clipped if it's far away. So as I zoom out here, right, Unity is smart enough to know that it shouldn't render the details from a distance, right? And that's just a trick to save performance. Okay, so I can just come in here and add this grass, something like that. And I can further customize that to my liking. For now, that looks fine. And then now, as I come in and look at the building, I can start to see that it's starting to take shape. I have my grass out here, I've got my trees in the background. It is starting to look like a cabin environment. So again, continue to bring those questions in. One thing that I'd like to do at this point, now that we've set up the grass and our trees and our terrain, is I'd like to be able to play this experience and walk around. So one of the items that you can use from the standard assets, again, very helpful set of assets that, again, got from the asset store here. There are some character controllers, okay? And if I go in here, I can look under characters, go to first person. Again, prefab is a configured object that we can use in our scene. And there are two options. Either will work fine, and I can just drag this into the scene. I'm going to zoom out here and find out where this object is. If I want to quickly zoom to it again, double click on it. It's a fast way. And this is going to be a little item that will allow us to move around in the game view. Okay. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to use my move tool, or I can use W on the keyboard to quickly get to that tool. And this will allow me to move this object. I'm going to move it over to our cabin. Okay. So I can zoom out and move this all the way over there. Again, to double click on it to zoom back in, went too far. All right, zoom out here, get this right in the right spot. Okay, so there is our first person controller. I can just put it above the ground a little bit. And now I can take our main camera. We don't need this anymore because our first person controller has a camera involved. I'm just going to delete this using the delete key. And now if I go into play mode here, what this first person controller allows me to do is move around using the WASD keys, similar to any first person controller that you would see in any game or any kind of computer experience. So I can actually now start to walk around. I can get different angles on the cabin here. I can see the shadows. One thing that you'll notice is that everything seems extremely static, right? Our trees aren't moving. It's possible that it's completely standstill. We do have some sway in the grass. We don't have that same sway in the trees yet. So I do want to go ahead and add the wind to make our trees move and add that little subtle effect, which will enhance the quality of our scene. So I can go out of play mode. Let's go ahead and add a wind zone to our trees, and then that should cap off the terrain for now. So to add a wind zone, you can go to the plus option here. It is a 3D object, and you can see it right here called wind zone. You can see this. So the wind zone, again, is going to be placed back at that origin all the way over here. So I can just bring it over. Okay, this wind zone, I'm going to place it in the trees. With the wind zone selected, I can choose a directional mode, meaning the wind will come from one direction, or I can choose a spherical mode. I'm going to choose a spherical mode and increase the radius to include all of our trees here. So maybe something like 200. I think that is definitely big enough. Okay. And then you can control, the turbulence and the power of this thing and the pulse parameters. I'm going to bring the main power down a little bit. Then if we go into the game view here, press play, we should see that our trees are starting to move a little bit. So this is a subtlety, but it adds quite a bit to your project, right? Before, those trees were looking extremely static, and it looked a little odd. Now with that wind zone, our trees are moving a little bit in the wind. We could further configure that wind zone to our liking, but that is a subtle touch that makes a nice difference. Okay. So let's go ahead and go out of play mode here and jump back to our slides. Take a few questions here before we jump on to the next challenge. So a question about how Unity is applied to building design and how it's being used outside real-time projects or outside in real projects. Is it being used mainly by architecture firms? So it's a great question. Unity is used a lot for immersive applications. So the virtual reality, augmented reality, this is one of the leading tools to create virtual reality and augmented reality experiences. Unity is also great for creating mobile experiences. So one of Unity's key benefits is the platforms that you can build to from Unity. You can build a single project and deploy it to a variety of different platforms. How it's being used in particular use cases is, you know, the use cases you mentioned, right? We're seeing it in architecture. We're seeing it used to visualize BIM and CAD models. So taking those from, you know, your Revits and bringing them right into Unity and seeing them in real time. We're seeing them used a lot in visualization. There's a really good lighting engine that is in Unity. So as we add lights, we can modify those in real time. Again, that just becomes a great visualization tool. It is also being used quite a bit in automotive. So would love to follow up if you have some specific questions about each of those use cases, and we can provide some additional videos for reference on some of those use cases. But generally, Unity is being used for visualization, anything that needs real time, and then you can deploy it to many different platforms. So that applies to many different industries. All right. So we've covered a lot already. We've covered the creation of this terrain. We've added our model in. We've got some realistic looking foliage. One thing that we didn't do is we didn't add our water in. So we'll add that when we go into the next challenge here. But I also want to bring up the idea of adding additional assets. Right now we have that single cabin model, which again, you'd replace with whatever model you were working with. And we've used the Unity terrain tool. We've already created a lot in the scene, but we have that whole Unity asset store at our disposal. So I'm going to jump back into Unity. Let's go ahead and add that water in, and then let's see how we could add some additional assets to enhance the look of our scene. So here we are back in Unity. In our scene, we've got our terrain, we've added foliage, we've painted things in. Let's go ahead and add some water over here so that this starts to look like a nice lake rather than just a dry lake bed. So in the standard assets, there is a nice water prefab that you can use. So let's see if I can get a first try here. Environment, water. There's a few different options. I'm just going to go to water, prefabs. We have a water pro daytime and a water pro nighttime. So depending on which scene you were trying to create, you'd use one or the other. I'm going to use the daytime. We're going to create a daytime scene here. What I can do is I can drag this in to the scene here. And we can see that it created something all over here. Again, I'm just going to bring this over. And I'm going to zoom up on this because we're going to want to expand this object. So right now, you can see that it is at the same level as that terrain. So if we bring this up to, say, a level of 4 on the y-axis, that will put it next to it would be 4 meters off the ground. But if we remember, we set our ledge over here to 5. So this is actually going to be really nice. It'll come a little bit more than halfway up the ledge, and it will start to look really great. So I'm going to zoom out here, and what I need to do is I've got this water. By default, it is this size, but we can just increase the scale here. So let's see what happens if I increase the scale. I'm going to try something like 200 by 200. Okay, we can see that that's not going to be quite large enough. We want to cover this whole area, so we're going to do something like 500 maybe, 500. That looks great. Let me zoom out a little bit. Position this. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and zoom in and see exactly what is happening here in the scene. So I've created this water asset, and we can see that it is coming up 4 units, and our level here is set at 5 units. So that looks nice. we can see that when we are back here next to our cabin, that this water appears to go to the horizon at this point, which is a really nice looking environment trick that you can use. So again, we can just look at this using the game view, go into play mode. And if I walk over to the water here, we can start to get an idea of what this looks like. Okay. And that water asset, again, is just in that standard assets package, and it looks pretty nice. Cool. So we've got the water, we've got our terrain going. What we're going to want to do now is add some additional assets. Okay. Now I'll leave this one up to you guys to explore, depending on the scene that you're trying to create. I've got a cabin in the woods next to a lake sort of scene going on here. One of the assets that I found, again, I'll share this entire project and leave a link for this so that anyone following up can check this out. But there are countless assets that you can use here in the asset store. We mentioned a few of them that we're using already. But you can, just explore this, really spend a lot of time finding assets that you want to use. So you can sort this by 3D assets, you can sort down to free assets, and you can just come in and find things that you want to use. The asset that I found that I wanted to use to create a little dock, I believe was this gaming people. I'll get the exact name for you here in my assets. Okay, and it was this shed tools right here. So you can find this, the shed tools, bridge and fences, and we're going to use this to create a little dock, and we could further up the scene here by adding fences as well as maybe a shed and some additional objects. But this is the asset that I use, so shed, tools, bridge, and fence by the gaming people. Again, just a free asset you can find on the asset store. I can see mine is downloaded and imported to the project here. Back to scene view. Come through, open up the prefabs, and I've got all these different items. I could add, say, a fence over here, right? I could build that fence all the way around the property. I'm going to use this bridge here. I think there's a full bridge. This is going to be a better one. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to delete that one. And I've got my full bridge here. I'm going to use this to create a little dock. So I'm going to get a little creative with this, rotate it around, move it over into the water, down. And then, I could line this up more perfectly, but you start to get the idea. Now I've added this bridge. Again, this is a bridge asset, but I'm using it here as a dock, and it looks pretty nice. And again, I added the fence. I could continue to add more props. Again, these little details are really going to take your scene from something that looks, very orchestrated to something that looks more organic. It's a lot of these details will add that realism to your scene. So spend some time combing the asset store, adding these sorts of details to your scene, and it will pay off in that end result. Right. So let's see, we have let's see, any questions coming in? And if not, we will continue on to the next challenge. We are making a good progress here. We're going to take about another 10 or 15 minutes with the next couple of challenges, and then we'll open up the end for a few more questions. But right now we are looking good. So we'll jump over to the deck here. Let's take a look at the next challenge. We've added additional assets to the scene. Again, this is a great way to take your project to the next level. And now what we want to do is add lighting. Right? So we want to configure the lighting in our scene, and this is going to really bring it all the way where we want it to be. So let's see how we can add lights in Unity and how we can configure them to make our scene look nice. So here we are back in Unity. Make sure the screen share updates here. So I'm back in the Unity project. And what I would like to do now is I would like to configure some of the lighting in the scene. So far, we just have this very default plain looking sky, which this is called a skybox. And we have a single directional light, which is acting like the sun, which we can see right there. But we can further the look of the lighting here in the scene. So where should you start when you want to make the lighting look better in a Unity project? Where should you start and how do you get started? The first thing you're going to want to do is consider what time of day you are going for. Right? Is it going to be a nighttime scene, a midday scene, or maybe a dawn or dusk scene? Depending on your answer, you're going to want to find a skybox, which again is going to be this sky that fits your desired look and feel. So the first place that you want to start when doing lighting design in Unity is you want to start with a skybox. So I've found, again, a couple of free assets from the asset store. You can just go in here and search for skybox. And you will find quite a few options. Let me get the exact name of this one. Used it quite a bit. So maybe pretty deep in my library here. I'll just do a search for it. It is a skybox. And again, I'm choosing free assets. Okay, and you can see quite a few different versions or options. Let's see. Well, I'll get the exact name. Wispy Skybox here is one that I've used in the past and like it a lot. But as you can see, there are lots of different Skybox options. I'll get that exact Skybox name. So if you're following along and want to use that one, you'll be able to grab it. But when you import that skybox, what you'll end up having is a couple of options here. We have a daytime option and a sunset option. So how do we add these skyboxes to the scene? Right now we're just using the default sky, but I would like to add one of these custom skyboxes to the scene. So in order to do that, you need to go to Window, drop down to Rendering, and click Lighting Settings. Okay. It's going to bring up this lighting window, and yours may be floating by default like this. What I like to do is grab this tab, and then I can just dock it wherever. I'm going to dock it over here next to the inspector. And you can see here that we have an option to change this skybox. One of the first options here we have is a skybox material. I can select this little circle with a dot here, and I can search for use the sunset option, skybox sunset, and when I select this, notice what happens. Now my scene has this really nice looking skybox. Again, this is where you're going to want to start when you begin lighting design in Unity. It's choosing a skybox. So I can select that. We can see that it has now been added. Here's a skybox material. We're going to leave this lighting window alone for a second. I'm going to go to the inspector here. Okay. And what I want to do now is I want to configure my sun to match with this sun here. Right? One of the issues that you'll see right off the bat is that your directional light, which again is the light that's causing these sorts of shadows, we can see that that is positioned over here somewhere, right? It is casting shadows down here to the left, but this doesn't match our skybox, right? We can see that the sun's supposed to be somewhere over here in our skybox. So we need to connect the two or make them look like they are one. So a simple way to do this is I can go into my skybox material and I can adjust the rotation. So let me look at the sky here so we can see exactly what's happening. If I select the skybox that I'm using, I can adjust the rotation. And as I bring that around, I can make it so that the sun is positioned over here. Okay. So now the sun is going to match the way that our shadows are aligned. We can further customize the light in the scene using this directional light. The directional light, if I double click on this, will take me over to this object here. This object simulates the sun, right? So this is kind of the main source of light in the scene. Again, I want this to be aligned so that it looks like it is coming from that area in the sky, which now it does look like that. And one of the things I can do is I can change the color to match the color of the sky. So I can grab a little eyedropper tool and I can come up in here and I can select one of these colors so that the scene has that sort of lighting. So what have I done here? Step one is I've created or added a skybox, right? That really sets the tone for the entire scene. The next step is I took the directional light and I made sure that the directional light, again, simulating the sun, matches with our skybox. That's going to add that realism to the scene. Okay, now I'm going to zoom back over here, and we can see that this directional light is causing the light here in the scene. If I were to change these colors, you can see the effect that is happening. Again, I'm going to choose that color so that the directional light matches the color of the sky. Okay. So let me go ahead and save the scene here. So you can get a lot of mileage out of the lighting window, selecting this skybox material and just using a directional light. So I think I will stop there. That is going to be a great start to the lighting workflow in Unity. If there are any questions, I would be open to taking those. So continue to drop those in. And let's go ahead and go into the game view and hit play and walk around and see some of our work. So we can see again the shadow here in the house. We can see our trees kind of waving in the wind. We can go out here and see our new dock that we added. We can see our lake. And I think I could even walk on this dock. I can use the spacebar to jump onto it, right? And this is starting to look pretty nice. I mean, for you know, something we put together in less than an hour, this is looking really nice. We can continue to customize this and make this look even better. So again, I will open it to any questions that we have. I'll jump back to the slides here. So I will hang out here for a second, make sure that if there's any questions, anything on the tip of anyone's tongue, that we can get that answered. And I do want to reiterate that I know a lot of folks are going to be watching the recorded version of this, and as they work through the project, they may have some questions that come up. I'm on the Slack channel, and Tim, who's helping out today, is also on the Slack channel. So feel free to reach out to either of us. We'd be happy to help address any questions regarding the project or regarding Unity and your development. So as we're closing up here, I do want to outline a few next steps, right? So you've created a terrain now, you've brought a building model in, and we've set up a nice looking environment. What can you do if you want to take this to the next level? So we are here today with an Intro to Environment Design workshop. There are a few other workshops that are happening at the AEC Hackathon, so I encourage you to check those out. Tim, who's joining us today, will be running one on bringing your BIM models into Unity. So the idea is that you can use this environment design workshop. You can go to Tim's workshop, which will be on Thursday, and you can learn how to bring your model in and place it in your custom environment. There's also another workshop that's going to be on C#, so if you're looking to add some custom features to your scenes, you can check that out. So there are probably a few more that I may be missing, so apologies if I'm missing some, but there are some great workshops you can check out to continue your Unity learnings. There are a few additional options that you can take. If you complete these AEC Hackathon workshops, we do have additional workshops that we run at KairosXR. So if you'd like to learn more about Unity and how you could take it to the next step, maybe introduce it to your team, or take your developers to the next level, feel free to check out our offerings at KXR.com, KairosXR.com. We will also be mentoring in the Slack channel that is going to be the support-unity Slack channel. So as you're working through your Unity projects, feel free to reach out. We'd love to connect and help answer any questions and provide any support that we can. And as you continue to work through these projects, explore, add additional assets and features, you will take steps towards mastery. So with that, I want to say thank you. We'd love to stay in touch. Let's connect on LinkedIn. We will be, again, on the Slack channels, so continue to reach out as you have questions, but we'd love to connect so that we can stay in touch even after the AEC Hackathon. So again, my name is Andy Jevsevar. I was also joined today by Tim, who's helping answer questions, and he'll be running a workshop on Thursday, and we look forward to being in touch.